Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Pauline Baird, and if you know anything about me, you know I tell stories. I tell the stories of my village, our family histories, our whispered stories, our practice hidden and long forgotten traditions. And we say, what this story say? Come in, sit down. If you know anything about Guyana, at this time of year, it's emancipation season. It's awash with activities, storytelling, preparation, food and dance and worship and spiritualism and religion. Yes, we got it. In this space, I will bring you stories from the village, in the voices of the people, telling you their culture, their concerns, their wishes, their history. So buckle up and listen. And when you listen, learn. And when you learn, teach. Go bring your neighbor, bring your friend. Matty tell Matty and friend tell friend. Share it like food. Share it like okra and rice. Share it like marby and kanki. Share it like duff and metemg. Share it like cook up rice. Like bambay in cold pot. Share it. Call your neighbor. Call your friend. Be generous. Let we talk this story. Watch this space and come back. And by the way, follow and subscribe. Click the button.
David Hinds is my name. I am a Guyanese and Buxtonian and Caribbean person. I am an associate professor at Arizona State University, where I teach Caribbean and African diaspora studies. In addition to that, I'm somewhat of a cultural and political activist. As a cultural activist, I try to contribute to the cultural life of my village and my country. And at the political level, I do political commentary and political organizing. So I am sort of what they will call a jack of many trades. I don't know if I'm a master of any.
Oh, perhaps you are, because a man once told me, oh, you need to go and talk to David Hinds. He's one of those unsung heroes of Buxton. And I said, well, sir, I had front row seat to the rise of this David Hinds. He's a Kali Twilly.
Yes,
So
yes.
it was, he said, you know him? I said, mm-hmm. Okay, so today I want to get your stories. And can you go back to your earliest memories about emancipation or 1st of August in the village? What was your earliest memory?
My earliest memory was in the late 60s, and I think it coincided with the formation of an organization called the 1st of August Movement of Buxton, which was founded somewhere around 1969. By a number of teachers and other activists in the village. I remember some of them well. Kwesi and Kofi, Francis Drake, who is now Kimani Nehusi, Theo Morris, who is now dead like Kwesi and Kofi, Kwame Apata had just come back to the village at that time and was part of that movement. Of course, Brother U.C. Kwayana was always there, the spirit behind it. You had people like Yvette Herod and Hazel Newton, what's his name? Ras Michael June, John Cromwell, Oris Azur, who we call Zuri. Those are all young men and women who formed this movement, and the whole idea was the revival of African cultures. You know, that was in the heyday of the African Society for Cultural Relations.
The ASCREA.
That was founded by Brother Yussi. It was a national organization, but of course Brother Yussi was from Buxton, and so Buxton was considered one of the headquarters, if you will.
Yeah.
And so the formation of the 1st of August movement was really an extension of that cultural revolution that ASCREA was pushing at the time. And so I remember as a little 9-10-year-old boy tagging along and going there with them, and I consider myself a member at that time. You know, sometimes sitting there with the bigger boys and girls and listening to them. So that was my first recollection of emancipation activities in the village. It was the 1st of August, and in those days the 1st of August wasn't a holiday. The holiday was August Monday.
Okay.
Yes, they didn't. Many people don't know that 1st of August emancipation, they only became a holiday in the 1980s. Yes, it was the colonial thing was August Monday. But we in Buxton, I gather from since I was a child, people would take the day off. Whether it was a holiday or not, they would take the day off because we consider that to be a holiday. So that was my first recollection. People getting together and dancing and beating the drums and eating conky and so on and so forth. And a lot of it used to be at County High School, the Republic Cooperative High School owned by Brother Yussi Kwayana. And I lived just around the corner from there. So I was always there, and those are my first recollections.
Oh, thank you. So we talk about the 1st of August movement. With 1st of August movement, of course, you get the term emancipation.
Yes.
To your mind, what's emancipation?
Well, yes, emancipation, I think, is a very deep and abiding phenomenon. I describe it as that, as phenomenon. I think the first thing when we talk about emancipation, we want to talk about memory.
Yes.
Because it's a memory of a time when a group of people were in bondage. And it was not the kind of bondage where somebody tie you up and, you know, loose you the next day. For, you know, 3-4 centuries, here were people who were enslaved against their will. And what enslavement meant was the taking away of people's humanity. And I think that is very important when we talk about emancipation.
Yeah.
So it's a memory of that time when people were held against their will and held in bondage. And there are all kinds of things that happen within that context that makes emancipation very important. The second thing I want to talk about emancipation is a question of overcoming. Because what emancipation meant was that here were people who survived this most inhuman system and they freed themselves. Note, I'm not saying that they were freed. They freed themselves because over that period of time, they developed a culture of resistance, and I say a culture of resistance rather than slave rebellions, because those slave rebellions were part of this larger culture of resistance. Because the human spirit, as you know, if you're enslaved, all you're thinking about all the time is how to get free. And over a period of time, your mind and your body and your creativity become that resistance is that's all part of it. And so therefore, those slave rebellions came out of that culture of resistance. There were also other forms of resistance. Malingering, singing, dancing, creating new languages, manipulating the English language to make it serve your purpose. Spirituality and spiritualism. So it was a holistic. And so when we think about emancipation, we must think about the brutality of slavery, but I think most importantly, we must think about the overcoming of slavery. The other thing I think emancipation meant is freedom.
Yes.
And I say freedom deliberately, because freedom is the ultimate in human aspiration.
Yes.
The freedom of the mind, the freedom of the body, freedom of the spirit. Without freedom, we are not human beings. And so therefore, as our foreparents came out of enslavement, they were thinking about freedom, because if your humanity is taken away, you're not free. If you cannot marry the person you love, you're not free. If you make your children and they then become chattel, you are not free. If you are not free to worship your God in the way you want to worship, you are not free. And so on and so forth. So emancipation meant freedom. And as we know, freedom is an ongoing process.
Yes.
And so therefore, the project, as I call it, of freedom goes on. I like to quote Bob Marley in this regard, who says, "No chains around my feet, but yet I'm not free." So the physical chains were gone, but the process of freedom continues. And it's a deliberate act, and it's also a not so deliberate act. Because as people move about their daily lives, trying to feed their children, trying to instill dignity in their children and in their community, they're engaged in the freedom project. And then there are the direct ways when people engage in struggle, people engage in political and social and cultural struggle, then they are in the process of freedom. So freedom is an important aspect of emancipation. What else about emancipation? Here in Guyana, we would like to talk about emancipation as humanism. Because, and here is why I say that, prior to 1838, when our foreparents eventually broke the shackles of enslavement, this country, this coastland, was a place where people were bought and sold as chattel. It was the wild coast. There was no humanity in slavery, and that is what this place was about. And so when our foreparents came out of enslavement in 1838 and quickly took their meager earnings that they were able to accumulate between 1834 and 1838, what we call the apprenticeship period, when slavery came to an end in 1834, but really didn't come to an end in a practical way, where the subjects and the objects of slavery were forced to still work as though they were enslaved. But at the end of the day, they were allowed to plant their little kitchen gardens and to sell their stuff on the open market. And they took those monies and resources and saved them. And then once they freed themselves, they did something remarkable. They bought lands, abandoned plantations. My own village, our own village, Buxton, was an old cotton plantation called Orange Nassau, which was bought by our people with their cash money, as they said.
Yes.
And then turned them into villages. And in turning them into villages, they were creating humanity. They were transforming our coast, our country, into a place where people can live as ordinary citizens and extraordinary citizens. They created churches, they created schools, they created an economy, the agricultural economy, they created their government in the form of the village council. So they humanize this place.
Yes, and remark the land.
Exactly, exactly. And the last thing I want to talk about in relation to emancipation is the way in which African freedom contributed to total freedom. What emancipation meant is that our brothers and sisters who came as indentured laborers afterwards could not come as slaves. So the freedom that African people won for themselves, they won it for everybody else. It meant that our indentured sisters and brothers who came here were adamant that they would not be enslaved. They came in a condition of quote-unquote relative freedom. Indentureship was terrible, you know. But it was not enslavement. And so therefore, those are the things I think that emancipation mean. Emancipation also mean accomplishment. Because, like I said, the village movement is African Guyanese gift to Guyana and the world. Because it was not replicated in any other part of the African diaspora. Here were people who were enslaved for over 200 years, 250 years, coming out of enslavement and engaging in an astronomical enterprise. It was entrepreneurship at its best. They didn't go to the bank and ask for a loan to buy their lands. All right? And they thought about what they want to do. It was cooperativism in the sense that it was not an individual going out there and saying, let me go and buy a piece of land. They pooled their resources.